Now that we've touched on the eloquent basics, we're going to talk about eloquent relationships. Now, the data that we have in our application at the moment is a user, or potentially many users, and posts. Now, at the moment, our schema over in posts suggests that no one can own this particular post. Normally what we would do within here is we would have a user ID column, which would be filled in with the user who owns the post. Now, we don't have any users in our application at the moment, and at the moment I've cleared out the posts table. The first thing that we want to do is add a user ID to our post so we can basically say who owns this particular post. And then for any signed in users in your application, you can fill that in and then they will own that post. And that means that you can get a list of posts from a user, or for a post, you can find out who owns it. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We'll do this all within this example route, and then we'll pull this together a little bit later. Okay, so let's go over and first of all create out a new migration. So I'm going to create a migration on the command line called add user ID to posts table. Now what I didn't say about migrations earlier is that we can actually specify a create flag or a table flag. What that will allow us to do is something like table equals posts, and that will construct the scaffolding when the migration is generated to already include the posts. So we can go ahead and do that. If we head back over to code, let's go under our database migrations folder, and sure enough, that has created a schema scaffold for us referencing the posts table. So we want to add a user ID. Let's do this in a really simple way first, and then we'll look at a slightly different way to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a big integer. It's always a good idea to do this if you have lots of potential users in your application and this gets larger. And we're going to go ahead and call this user ID. We're going to make this unsigned because it is a positive integer. And we're going to give this an index as well. That'll add an index in your database just to speed things up, because when you're looking up a list of posts, for example, and you're referencing a user, you want this to be a little bit faster. So if you add an index to your database, that will help speed things up. Okay, so let's leave this as it is for now, and let's look at the relationship between a user and posts, and a post and a user. We'll see this output in our example route. So a user has many posts, so we want to create a relationship here on the user model that tells Laravel that this has many posts. Let's go ahead and do this, and then we'll see how it works. So I'm going to create out a posts method in here, and now I just need to return the relationship type and what this relates to. Now there are lots of different relation types in Laravel, ranging from the really simple up to more advanced relationships, but what we're going to look at here is a has many relationship. So it's written out exactly as it is. A user has many posts. So what we do is from this method we return this has many, and then we give the model inside of here, the fully qualified namespace to the model. So in this case it's post and class. So we can go ahead and import this if it's in a different directory, but what we now have set up is the ability for a user to have many posts, whether we're creating a post through a user or we're just listing out posts through a user. Let's try this out now. So let's come over to our web routes. The first thing we need to do, since we don't have any kind of authentication system in place, is pluck that user out of the database. So let's go ahead and use the user model, and let's use find. Now if we come over to the database, at the moment we don't have any users, so I'm going to go and just create out a fake user in here, and let's go ahead and just add in a plain text password because we're not actually authenticating, and I guess let's fill in the username as well. Okay, so I'm going to create a couple of posts in here which are owned by that user. So we're going to say post 1, let's say post 1 body, save that out, and let's fill in the created at and updated at dates. We'll look at inserting in just a minute as well. So this post is owned by the user with an ID of 3, that's changed to 3, and let's create another one in here as well. So let's duplicate this one down, and let's change this to post 2, and let's change this to post 2 body. Great, so this user now owns 2 posts because this is added in here. Okay, so what we're now going to do is look that user up by its ID, output the user just to test this out, and we just need to make sure that we pull in the user namespace there. And there we go, so that's the user. Now we want to access the relationship on here, and Laravel will pull everything together nicely for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to access posts, but we're not going to invoke this as a method. We're just going to use this almost like it's a property. What this will do behind the scenes is it will determine the relationship type. It will construct a query which pulls all posts out of the database with that particular user in mind. So we've got the user in here, and we're pulling out all posts where the user ID equals 3. Let's go over and check this out. So if we give this a refresh, sure enough, we get a collection of 2 posts because that user owns both of them posts. If we just duplicate this user down really quickly and just call this something else, say billy@codecourse.com, and go ahead and just switch the username out because of course that's unique, and we change this post over to an ID of 4 or 5 in this case for that user, then we'll only get 1 result back here because I only now own 1 post. Okay, so that's the relationship between the user and the posts sorted. Laravel's done all the work behind the scenes because we've used a posts method name, we've used a post model which has a user, so that will look that up in the users table, ID, so it will look it up by this key. So everything's kind of working together. You can pass options through to here if things do change, but most of the time you want to keep just things to their standards, and all of that is over in the Laravel docs. Now the next thing we want to do is look at the reverse relationship. So if we were pulling a post out or showing a post on a page, surely we'd want to find out who owns this post. Well, in this case, we can create out a user method and we can return a slightly different relationship type. So a user has many posts, but a post belongs to a user. So we use the belongs to relationship type. And again, we pass in the fully qualified class name of that model. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go back over to our web roots and instead let's find a post, a particular post. So let's go over to our database and let's find post 16. So let's find post 16, and now we can access post user, and that will give us the user who owns this post. Let's just make sure we have post pulled in, and we do. Let's come over and give that a refresh, and there we go. So we know that I own that particular post. If we were to switch this over to that other post, which is an ID of 17, of course we get out a different user. So you could use this to pass this data down to your view, and you could output the user who owns that particular post. And we're going to be doing that a little bit later. Now, the reason that we didn't access this as a method is because the method will return to us the relationship type, which will allow us to continue to chain on things we want to do. So let's take a look at an example of this. I'm going to go ahead and find that particular user. So let's again pull out user 3. And I want to create a post that belongs to this user. Now, there are a couple of ways that you could do this. So you could say post create if you were creating a post for a particular user. You could define the title out, you could define the body out, and you could go ahead and specify the user ID. That's usually what you would think you would do. So I want this post that's been created to belong to this particular user. Let's go over and see what happens. So first of all, user ID doesn't have a default value. The reason that this isn't working is because over on our post model, we don't have the user ID set to fillable. Now, I don't like doing this because we already have the relationship set up here. So what we could technically do is look the user up first of all, and normally they would be signed in, so you'll already have access to them, and then create a post through that user. So by this I mean going ahead and finding the user in whichever way that is, whether it's manually or via authentication, and then saying user, but this time not using the posts attribute, using the posts method, and then saying create. So this is effectively the same as saying post create, but we're just creating it through that user. So now all we need to provide in here is the title and the body, and Laravel behind the scenes will fill in the user ID for us because it knows how that relationship is set up. Let's go over and give that a refresh, and if we come over to the database, you can see that's been created with that user ID. So there are much more complex relationships types within Laravel. We do have a course on that as well, so you can check that out. But most of the time, the belongs to and has many are what you're going to be using for most of your models.